Welcome to Storytelling with Data, the podcast where listeners around the world learn to be better storytellers and presenters with best-selling author, speaker, and workshop guru Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic. We'll cover a wide range of topics that will help you effectively show and tell your data stories. So get ready to separate yourself from the mess of 3D exploding pie charts and deliver knockout presentations. And with that, here's Cole.
Hi, I'm Cole, and I'm here today with my friend Andy Cotgreave. Andy, welcome to the Storytelling with Data podcast.
Hi, Cole. It is great to be here.
I am super excited because we have a timely topic we are going to discuss, presenting virtually. And we're actually presenting virtually right now. We have some members of the community who joined in to watch live, which we'll be recording as well. And this is the raw version that they get. Those listening will get the refined, edited edition. For folks who want to learn more about that, you can do so at community.storytellingwithdata.com/premium. So as I mentioned, I'm here with Andy Cotgreave. Andy is co-author of the Big Book of Dashboards. He's technical evangelist at Tableau. And Andy and I have actually had the opportunity to meet virtually a couple of times lately. I joined him for his If Data Could Talk series, where we discussed projects for teaching logic and math and data visualization with kids. This was on the more produced side of the spectrum. He and I also had a totally informal chat, which is where the seeds for this conversation came from. And actually, Andy, you've been on the Storytelling with Data podcast before. Where were we last time?
Yeah, last time we were on the podcast, it was myself, you, Steve Wexler, and Jeff Schaefer backstage at the Las Vegas Mandalay Bay Arena prior to or after Iron Viz, one of the keynotes. A stadium where I'd been on stage with 5,000 people and 18,000 attendees at the conference. Hustle and bustle, different times, hey?
The world has changed literally since then. Yeah. So backstage at the Tableau conference, sitting much closer than 6 feet apart. Yeah. And I should actually put this out here, given the topic of our conversation, which is that I have historically been pretty resistant to presenting virtually. All right, Storytelling with Data, we're a remote team, so we're used to meeting and working virtually, but losing a dimension when it comes to teaching and workshops, that seemed like too big of a trade-off. So I think one, silver lining of the situation currently is one of the lessons it's taught me is just to get over that and embrace the ways in which virtual can work. Andy, how do you feel about the shift to virtual?
Well, it's clearly been a massive transition of our lives in the last 2 months. On a personal level, I've been working at Tableau for 8 years, nearly 9, and I've always been a home worker. So I've had a slight advantage in that I'm much more used to working remotely than.
Do you have an office that you go to at all, or you're entirely?
Yeah, my local office is the London office, and I try and go there once a week, but I travel a lot around the world in previous times. Maybe once a month I'm in the London office, but primarily I'm here. And it's actually been an advantage for me because in a world where I work remotely, but nearly everybody is in an office, it actually disadvantages me. Whereas now we're all remote, so it actually levels the playing field a bit. And my home office is well established. I've got a nice standing desk. I've got 3 screens in front of me. So that's been pretty good on the personal level. Obviously, big challenges around.
Well, and it's almost like I would remember this at Google, right, where we'd travel to another office on the other side of the room where the time zones are completely different, and you'd become more empathetic as a result of that, right, of realizing like, oh, people are working crazy hours because they've got to be online when Mountain View is, for example. Have you felt that, right, where people are maybe more appreciative of all that you have been doing now that they see how hard some of this stuff is?
Unfortunately, about 80% of the work I do is with our headquarter office. So 80% of the work I've done has been with Seattle anyway. So I've always been 8 or 9 hours ahead of people. So just as I'm mentally ramping down at the end of every day, that's when all my colleagues wake up and are like, Andy. I'm like, okay. So again, it kind of levels the playing field for me personally. Realize I'm in a fortunate bubble there. But I've been exhilarated in the last 2 months with this need to really rethink, how do you present to people in this environment? I've done it loads of times, but it's been exhilarating, right? So I'm really excited to talk about it today.
And what sort of virtual presenting are you doing?
Well, as doing things like this with Tableau, we've launched our own video series, If Data Could Talk, finding the intersections between data and life, bringing those stories to life. That's interview. We've been ramping up charts chat with Steve.
On the data could talk, what are some of the other topics? So I mentioned you and I chatted recently about using data and teaching kids. What other topics have you been covering?
Well, we are looking for diversity. So we spoke to Larry Samuelson, who's a Yale professor of economics, about game theory and economic recovery. We spoke to RJ Andrews, author of Info We Trust, about Florence Nightingale. We've looked at all sorts of different diverse ways of telling data stories. We've had people from the Kaiser Foundation, using data for good. So we're trying to just bring across. I mean, data's everywhere, right? And I just want to bring those stories to life. If I have an ambition,
is that typically you talking with one other person?
Yeah, generally we've been Amanda McCulloch, who's one of the directors of Data Visualization Society, is co-hosting several episodes. We're going to have a bunch of different people interviewing a bunch of different guests over time. But it's been really exciting to get that going and learn about remote video production. Really ramp that up.
And are you finding that people are more receptive to saying yes for being on the other side of that? Because one of the anecdotes that I've heard people express is that people are much, it's easier to get a hold of people, easier to get people to commit to things because there are less other demands, I guess, right? People aren't going into the workplace. Their schedules are maybe more open than they've been historically.
You know what, Cole? I've not really thought of that. People have been saying yes to our requests. I've just thought because we've got an amazing proposition for them, but maybe because they've got nowhere else to be. It could be that, right? I mean, but we certainly seem to be getting enthusiasm from guests. So yeah. The other thing we're doing is chart chat. Chart chat. That talks about, more specifically about data visualization and storytelling with Steve and Jeff and Amanda McCulloch. And that one's been really interesting because the format there is it's an hour-long presentation or show, and we do 3 5-minute segments about a chart or some story we found, some communication. And we do like a 5-minute mini presentation and then a 7 or 8 minute debate about it. And that's I've loved creating content for that, because just thinking about how to build a slide and then how to just kind of finish and ramp up into a way that can enable Steve, Jeff, Amanda, and I essentially to have an argument. It's been really exciting doing it that way. And the last thing, loads of remote presentations for customers and a lot more facilitating remotely than I've ever done before. Really challenging.
And where's the facilitating? Where's the need for that coming up, or what?
I work with Tableau, and we a lot of events for slightly more executive audiences are based around round tables. It's like they bring the execs together, and the executive audiences like to hear from each other rather than a sponsor. And these are great things to do in a big round table in a conference center or in a meeting room, because you can see the whites of their eyes. How do you facilitate that kind of conversation when you're all in a gallery view has been an interesting challenge, one I've really enjoyed doing, actually.
That's awesome. I want to come back and talk more about that as we get into some of these other topics that we have planned. So on the storytelling with data side, everything we're doing has moved virtual. We've historically done webinars. Those, if anything, we have more of them today than we have historically, but the format hasn't really changed. The biggest shift we've made is in our client workshops, which then this was where I had the hang up on virtual, right? Where you get such energy in the room, when you're spending half a day or a day with a team, you can see the response, you can see the reaction, you can speed up and slow down and move around the room. And I just thought, no, shifting to virtual is not going to work for that. But it's been working. It means attacking things in some different ways and being thoughtful about this different delivery mechanism.
Yep.
But we're finding there's some really interesting opportunities opportunities, right, when you shift to virtual that don't exist in the same way when you're there live. So that's been really interesting.
Yeah, it totally is. I think the energy you feel in the room when you're doing a great presentation or a great workshop, I mean, that's what keeps me in my job. It's just, you walk out there and think, right, I've got another year in this job or another future in this job because it's just phenomenal, right? And yes, you are going to miss out on that physicality, but there are ways around it, right? There are ways around it. It is amazing how opening the microphones, getting people to type in questions, using breakout rooms. I've not actually used breakout rooms much.
Oh, we've been doing that and been working amazingly. We can talk more about that.
And yeah, just bringing the audience into the webinar or the presentation, whatever word we want to talk about it, is an opportunity you have to embrace, right? And it's great that you've been doing it. Polls as well. Have you been using polling?
Yes, we've been using polling and chat and questions. And I think one of the most interesting points that it was raised to me by a client. And this was one who had an interesting perspective because it was actually to the last full day workshop in person that I had done together with Mike on the team in London. And then we'd done some webinars for him. And then he had us do a virtual workshop with his team. And it was for, I want to say about 30 people. And he sent me a note afterwards and we had a nice exchange. And he was thrilled with the virtual piece. And I thought this was a unique perspective because he'd seen what it's like when you're there in person and then he'd seen the virtual. And because the side conversation that they were able to have across his team in chat, there was some really rich conversation that happened there that wouldn't have happened in the same way, right? Because you're not going to start talking in the middle of the workshop. And then he also said it really leveled the playing field in terms of people were being vocal on chat who never would have spoken up in person in a workshop. So it does an interesting thing maybe for some of the more introverted people attending, but it gives everybody an equal opportunity to participate, even if they don't normally have a loud voice.
Yeah, I might go down a little rabbit hole of facilitation here because I think the introvert extrovert thing is really important. And as a presenter, you can do loads of things to help both types of people. So in chart chat, we normally presented and we take Q&A from people, but the thing with the session would end after about an hour. But Chris Love, one of the Tableau Zen masters, suggested, why don't you do a after hours charts chat and have like 30 minutes as a more round table and let the audience contribute. And it was brilliant, right? It was really good. But the thing for that introvert aspect, so I said I'd facilitate it, and it was like, okay, so laying out ground rules. Okay, we're all on mute. If you want to say something, use the chat. If you want to say something, all right. I was asking people on the camera, raise your hands, right?
Like
raise your hands.
So you can see them.
Yeah, physically raise your hands or use the hand icon in Zoom. And then, and also watch for people nodding or shaking their heads, right? You can still see that body language from people. And
even just their positioning, right? For people who have the camera on, are they leaning in and they're interested or they're like sitting back or typing and multitasking?
Yeah. And then something I've learned as well is, I knew we had one introverted person on who, I could kind of see her kind of leaning in, leaning out. And again, it was like, say, without opening a mic, it's like, okay, would you like to say something, right? Raise your hand if you want to say something. It's fine if you don't. So rather than putting them on the spot, giving them the opportunity to say, yes, I want to volunteer the contribution. And another tiny thing I've discovered or learned is that if I know I'm going to come to you in 10 seconds, Cole, with a question, then I'm going to say, Cole, I'm going to come to you in a moment. Then I'm going to say my thing. And then I'm going to ask you the question, right? Because
that is so smart. It gives people a little bit of time to prepare.
Yeah. And I can't guarantee you're paying attention to me right now, Cole, right? I can see you're nodding at this particular moment, but, I get, and then what do you think, Cole? I think, so it's just little things like that. And I think help get more people into the conversation.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we shifted further from my direction in the virtual direction when we started to realize that was where things needed to go in terms of trying to have all of the interactions be online. And we started using our storytelling with data community in some interesting ways in the workshop, some which worked and some that we're still refining. Because what we found more recently as we're observing what's working, what's not, is really taking the things that we know work well in person and figuring out how can you best emulate that in the virtual environment, right? Your suggestion of having people physically raise their hand is one example of that. Or the other place that we've been playing with great success and feedback are breakout rooms. It's part of the big value of being in person is that people can talk to each other and have these discussions and grapple with a makeover or an example and talk to other people and get ideas through the course of that. And we recently discovered how beautifully Zoom does breakout rooms and have been doing that as part of the workshops, where for the hands-on piece, you say, all right, stay tuned because you are momentarily going to be transformed or transported to a different place. You're going to have a group of people there. Turn on your cameras. You're going to be unmuted. You should talk to each other. And they get put in this space, and we get to bounce back and forth across the rooms and check in and say hello and listen to the conversation.
Oh, that sounds great.
Of people talking and chat, and it's been working really well.
That I need to try that. One set of things I try and do is, I wrote in our show notes, do silly things, right? And it's like have a bit of chutzpah and think, if I can wake the audience up out of their sort of leaning back comfort zone, maybe looking at a different screen, it's actually really engaging. And I've tried to do this in live presentations, but one example in sort of face-to-face presentations, I often will show people what version A or version B on a couple of slides, and I'll be like, okay, you guys over here, close your eyes, right? And everyone's like, why am I closing my eyes? So they close their eyes and see what the other team see one thing, and what I'm showing is a chart with different types of color highlighting on, and trying to make the point that depending on how you use color, I can completely control the conclusion. So how do you do that remotely? Well, I actually decided I'd just carry on doing it. So I'm like, okay, if your name begins with the letter A to M, close your eyes, right? And then, I trust they're all closing their eyes. I have no idea. And then we go through the experiment. The other half opens their eye, closes their eyes, and then just use the chat. What did you see? And it works really well. People have given me amazing feedback on that because it's just out of the norm, right? It's not slide, words on slides, words on slides, words on slide. It's like, what? I've got to close my eyes. Okay. All right. So it's little things like that.
And then they're involved, right? They're vested. It's a small thing, but now they're tuned in to see what you're going to do with that.
Yeah. And another thing, sometimes you're like, how do I'll often in doing live presentations or workshops, you just like show two different styles of chart, right? A beautiful one and a very functional one. And then you get people to have a conversation with each other and which do you like, which do you prefer and why. And that's always been just an enriching thing to get people involved. And then you think, okay, how can you do that remotely without it just becoming a free-for-all? So I prime people. It's like, okay, I want you to think of 4 words or 5 words you can type to describe why you like this thing. Right, so you're giving them the instruction to do something, but it's really concise. And then you see the chat just floods up with all these opinions, and then people are back chatting and responding to them. So it's about finding the engagement opportunities without a huge sometimes with a small investment of their time or investment of effort. I'm finding really effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And these ways of breaking up content, to your point. So it's not just slide after slide after slide. Speaking of slides, how are the materials that you're using different in a virtual environment? Are you still using slides?
Yes and no. Great. I feel like I should give you more information than that. So turning the screen share off as much as I possibly can, right? I think
so that people are looking at you and at each other.
Yeah. So going to gallery view as much as you can. However, a lot of what I do is about helping customers learn about the principles of visual analysis. So one of the things that's been so paramount in my mind the last 3 years as I think about presentations is it is my job as the presenter to ensure the audience knows exactly which part of a slide they should be looking at any given point. And I think that's even more important now we're virtual. Slide design, I'm trying to turn PowerPoint into, I'm building much richer animations within the slide decks. It's like, look at this bit and then look at this bit. Just build that animation just so they can follow things. A principle you talk about at length in your books is about, if we're going to present data or complex concepts, it's introduce it piece by piece by piece. And it's been really good thinking about how to do that in all the presentations I've built, and sort of transferring them to a virtual environment. So yeah, I think driving your audience's eyeballs is the key advice I'd give to people. Yeah.
And motion is a great way to do that, right? And that's one of the things that we've been noticing as we're redesigning content to bring it virtual, is that we're doing many more builds, right? Like you talk about, of start with the blank graph, talk about it, put on the axes, layer on data, but also just noticing when we're sitting on a slide for a while, because in person, it doesn't matter if you're sitting on a slide for a while, because you can move around the room and speed up and slow down and do things with your cadence and your physical body to keep attention, right? Because people aren't necessarily just staring at the slide, they're looking at you, versus when you are in a place where you have to keep doing the screen share and you're a tiny box in the corner. So we've been building in more motion. So not like the flying, throbbing in, but the appear, disappear, even, there's some things that we do where we have somebody read a block of text for various reasons, right? It might be to get context, or it might be to illustrate that reading blocks of text is hard. But then we'll break that up and we're talking back through it to highlight a word or two, so that people they have something to follow along visually as they're listening to us. So it's not just a static screen.
Yeah.
Where it's easier just to tune out, right?
So I put a big quote on a presentation in Chart Chat a couple of weeks ago, and it was a quote of about maybe 25 words. I was like, well, if I just put this quote on the screen, everyone's going to read it before I read it. So I tried to build an animation that kind of changed the color to a highlight as at the speed at which I was reading the words, and I thought this is going to be great because they're going to be following. And then at the end, Steve was like, "Yeah, I find that build really distracting." And what we couldn't work out was whether it was he was distracted because he was trying to parse how did you do that in PowerPoint, or whether it was actually distracting. And so what we haven't worked out is to somebody who just was trying to consume the content, were they following along, or was it, that's a technical trick that I don't know how to do. So the whole concept of adding builds, right? It's with the great power comes great responsibility. You can go down the path and create a mess, but just use it wisely. Right?
And what do you use to figure that out, right? So certainly getting direct feedback like that can pause us and cause us to pause and think about things. But and I've felt that too with ours, of like, when is enough, and when does it go beyond that to too much when it comes to builds and animation and getting that balance right?
I mean, something I've done in live presentations and works in virtual is I give people in the audience, either somebody I know well or even an audience member I don't know very well. I might sort of prime them and say, look, I want you to be my honest person giving feedback here. I sort of empower you to tell me what you like and what you don't like here. People who know me the best are often the ones who can give me the really deep constructive feedback, which is great, right? And so you sort of ask for people. And we've got into show notes, and I'll talk about it now. How can you try out these new techniques? How can you try out new things? It's like, well, just experiment. Have a go. Your career is never going to be judged on a single presentation, right? So try things out. Why am I saying that? Because then I might say, Steve, in this next presentation, I'm going to try out this new text wrapping revelation animation. I want you to tell me what you think of that bit. So empower people you trust to give you the feedback you need to hear.
Yeah, it's great advice. And I like the idea, because I'll do that often with people after the fact, but without priming them ahead of time. And I think if you prime people ahead of time, hey, I'm going to be asking you to let me know how this thing worked or how you felt at this point.
Yeah.
When you felt less engaged or more engaged, that then they're paying more attention in those ways and can give better.
Oh yeah, so that's the thing. I think I mean, I've been presenting for 20 years. I remember getting graduate training in how to do presentation back in 1996, and one of the hardest things it is to get honest feedback from people if you haven't primed them, because for many people they think, oh my God, he's presented. That is the most amazing, terrifying thing I could ever imagine. So he wants my feedback. I'm like, well, Andy, it was great, right? And if I give him feedback that this whole bit in the middle was boring, then, I'm insulting his entire persona and it's going to crush him. So I feel like people don't like giving honest feedback, right? So you've got to be like, look, bring it on, right? I've developed a thick skin over the years, and I've also dished out a lot of very constructive feedback to colleagues, so they are happy to give it back to me.
All right. So we talked about slides, we talked about motion. You've talked a little bit about some of the other things you're doing with, well, I guess we mentioned polling, but didn't really talk about that much. But when you think of the materials and the way that you're encouraging people to interact, how's that looking different in the virtual space?
I think we've kind of covered most of that. What am I saying? So that whole aspect.
You have one note actually that I want to dig into more, which is open the mic, because that part scares me.
Yeah, so this specifically has been in facilitation. I think it's partly the audience you're with. If I'm on an open registration webinar or presentation, then I'm not going to open the mic. But one of the things I've learned over the years is the less I can say, the more an audience will enjoy my presentation or enjoy the experience of the presentation, right? And my feedback has gone up the less I've said. And so when going to virtual, it's like, how can let's say I've got 100 people. I'm like, okay, this is a challenge. So it's like, okay, I'm going to prime people. Do you like this chart or do you like this chart, right? And then I'll say, if you have an opinion, type it in. And if you want, and I'll say, okay, Cole, let's open your mic. Tell me what you think. And I'm happy doing that where I kind of know where the audience has come from. And it's not failed me yet. The inspiration for this was, there's a show I recommend everybody listens to. It's on BBC Radio 4 and it's called The Public Philosopher. And I forget the name of it, but it's a philosophy podcast or show on Radio 4 where the professor, let's say the topic is citizenship. So the presenter knows the 6 things he wants to talk about, but he doesn't say anything. He just asks really difficult binary questions to the audience, and he gets them to raise their hands, and then he pitches one answer to the other, and then he just subtly nudges them along, and then he gets to the end of the show and goes, "We talked about this, and this, and you all said it." And I love that attitude of realizing that your audience actually are incredibly intelligent. And when I've tried it virtually, it has not failed yet.
And how are you actually facilitating that virtually, right? Because it still feels like one of those that when you're in person, you can control it and you can get people involved.
So if we talk a little bit to the facilitation aspect, where some facilitation I've done in small groups. First of all, preparation. I know who the people are and what they want to get out of the session. So the one I did most recently was about sustaining a data literate workforce, right, through this crisis and beyond. So we had 10 guests. We'd asked them for what they wanted to get out of this roundtable. So I knew I was going to ask for all the 7 or 8 questions. I knew each question was hitting 2 or 3 people's outputs for the webinar. Then it was like, okay, let's talk about finding new recruits, right, or whatever the question was. But again, I did this thing to be like, Cole, I'm going to come to you first, and then I introduced the topic. Cole, what would you like to say? Then that would open the mic. And then while that person is answering, I'm then looking at the gallery view thinking, well, I can see somebody nodding. So it's like, okay, Randy, I saw you were nodding. Or, oh, Randy, you were shaking your head. Would you like to contribute? And then up they come. And then again, just breaking it between each topic, being like, okay, who agreed with what we saw, what we were just talking about? Everybody raised their hand if you agreed. And then suddenly you've got 5 people you can come to.
So you're still working to get the same sort of visual cues that you would have if you were in a room with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is amazing in Zoom. Mobile phones have been a blessing to presenters, right? Because controversial statement, right? Because I know if I'm on stage and I can see about a third of the audience looking at the phones, that's a really powerful piece of feedback. I also know if everybody's taking a photo of a slide, I've clearly made a very good slide. So phones are great. We don't have that virtually. But what you do have, you can see where, though. You can make a good guess where people's eyes are. So if lots of cameras are on, you can see, hang on, everyone's looking over there. They've all gone down. So you're like, okay, it's time to move on or just wake everybody up with something.
And then because in a room, when you see people, you see someone pick up their phone, you can actually, as a facilitator, do sneaky things like walk over closer to that person and continue talking, and they put their phone down. You lose that third dimension, right? We've become flattened in the virtual environment. So are there things that you do differently with yourself as a result of that, with your voice or your body motion?
I'm standing up now, and I believe you are too. I think
I'm sitting, but I'm at a high desk.
Very good. Right. I've got an adjustable height desk, and again, that's one of the benefits for me that I've been working at home for a long time. So I find standing up brings energy to me. Some of the things you can do if you're remote and you have more than one screen, it's actually quite easy to think if you're seeing people drift off, you've got a lot of things around. You can bring different applications in or skip slides a lot easier. Just go to the end of the section you're on.
Yeah, the standing is a good one. And it's funny because when I'm presenting something, and particularly if it's running along the course of the lessons that we teach, because I'm so used to being standing that it feels weirdly constraining to be sitting. So the live events that we're doing where it's more of a produced sort of deal, for those, standing. It gives you, when you're live, it gives you a different sense of presence and control in the room. And I think there's some piece of that translates even when it's a camera you're talking to instead of a group of faces.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people say to me is like, well, it's really weird. I'm in my room. How can I present to people? I'm just looking at a webcam, right? And that is difficult. And I think that's something I've just learned over the years to be like, just look at your webcam, but pretend it's 100 people, right?
Yes.
I've just learned that skill over time. I don't know quite how I first developed that skill. I don't know how I got over that hump, but there is that. Just imagine you're speaking to 100 people.
And there are hacks there, right? Where you put a picture of somebody, or anytime that you can be setting up the view of a video call so that you can see other people. Yeah. That's the ideal, right? So that you can be talking to the camera, but also see people nodding or smiling, or to your point earlier, see them pick up their phone or go to their email and turn to do something else.
Yeah. So in fact, I'm going to take a photograph of my screen.
All right, so I can see Andy. For those listening, he's got his phone up. He's taking a picture of the screen.
Because what I want people to see, so we'll have to share that is your. So my webcam is on top of my monitor. I've got things set up so that your face is right beneath my webcam. I've minimized my own. Yeah, I've minimized my face as much as I can because I think it's very easy to look at yourself as you're talking. Yeah. I've got the notes we've got for this episode are off to the far side of the screen, and that all of that helps me keep my eye on the camera.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to take a picture too because this will be fun to do our side by side, right?
Yeah, because I could look on this monitor. In fact, no, I'm going to look at the camera. Yeah, so it's just a case put the people where the camera is as far as you can.
What about length? Are you adjusting length because you know how draining it can be to stare at a screen for a long amount of time?
Yes, right. So when you came on, if data could talk, we said we're just going to do a 15-minute chat, and I think we came in at 20, and we got to the end of it, the two of us, and we're like, well, that was quick. Yeah. And actually, yes, it is quick. So I think it's been really hard to get guests on that show and be like, look, we just want 15 minutes.
And is your 15 minutes is because you want to keep them short and snappy so that you keep people's attention in this environment?
Yeah. And then chart chat. I'm always torn with chart chat because I've always felt, it's hours a bit long. We don't see much drop off in the audience once they're on. So, I think that works out because we do 3 15-minute segments. On a bigger sort of corporate level, Tableau was acquired by Salesforce, and now we get involved in the big Salesforce events. And Salesforce has been really interesting because as they're moving to virtual, in fact, even beforehand to a degree, they're like, no breakout sessions in conference events are longer than 20 minutes. Only Mark Benioff gets to do an hour and a half keynote. Everybody else, you only get 20 minutes. And that's the TED Talk format. And it's actually really good. I really enjoy the challenge of thinking, I've got this content. How can I possibly reduce this amazing, enlightening content to just 20 minutes? And then you do it. And then you think, it was I always went on too long when I was doing it for an hour. So yeah, Salesforce is mandating we reduce our presentation time for that kind of content.
And there are benefits to that, right? Of that constraint, and then you're forced to pick out the most salient points you want to make, and be more direct in your thinking and your approach.
Yeah, and a presentation. I mean, what you're trying to do in a presentation, I'm not trying to give you the kind of content you would get in a book. Your book, Storytelling with Data. There's your worksheet. There's hours and hours and hours of brilliant things I could learn from that. But really, in a presentation, you're just giving the inspiration, right?
Yeah. All right, let's shift up the pace here, and I want to go into more of a lightning round where I'm going to throw things at you, and I just want your reaction. And if you want to lend some context, that's fine. And I kind of laugh because I've tried this before, and the lightning round ends up sometimes going on for very long.
There's at least one of these questions that is going to take a while to answer.
All right, so cameras, microphones. Do you use what's built into your computer or fancy external stuff?
Well, if you're doing this an awful lot, you need an external microphone. Yep.
Now, I'm just curious because I can't see yours. Where is it positioned?
Right now, it's on. I'm now holding the microphone very close to my mouth. Yeah, so it's movable on my desk. I do.
And so it's on a tripod sitting in front of you.
Yep.
Mine, for the record, comes up and over. It's like just out of the screen here.
I need a boom because it's not very practical here.
Camera? Are you using your computer camera or you have an external one?
I've got a Logitech high def camera. Again, if I prioritized one, I'd have the microphone over the better camera. But once you get into production levels of actually doing a regular series, a camera and a microphone are vital, I think.
Absolutely. What about special lighting?
Yeah, yes, special lighting. And it's not bad. I've got a really nice light, big strip light it's a desk light I've had for 10 years, and it's actually not bad. The problem I have in the moment with my office at the moment is I've got this time of day. We're late in the mid-afternoon in the UK. I've got the sun comes streaming in. Mm-hmm. I haven't yet got a blind on the window, so yes to good lighting, and I need to fix mine.
Yeah, I sometimes joke that part of the reason that Randy, my husband, likes to do these sort of things and the podcast is so that he can get lots of fun equipment. So lights has been a new thing for us lately. So I've got a ring light in front of me, sort of off over here, and then a highlight over there that has a much more technical name than that I don't know. To get some depth.
It looks great. It looks great.
Good light from the window. Lighting, makes a difference for sure. And what about? So I already know your answer to this, but I'm curious in your thoughts still around this. But for your background, do you use what's in the room or a blank slate?
Well, anybody who's looking at watching this live or has seen me do any webinars will know my office is adorned with pictures from my. Well, each one has a story.
And the mint green wall, I imagine you're really easy to pick out in the gallery view because I almost feel like I'm in the room with you when we do these things because there's such a distinct color on the walls.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, so it's a lime green wall, right? And that I love this color, and it just happened to be we had a spare paint can left over from the color we painted my younger daughter's room, but I really like this color. And a lot of people have said, oh yeah, it's distinct. So I know I'm an extrovert, so I love having the big detailed background. I really like seeing other people's detailed backgrounds. It's interesting, right? I find that interesting, but it doesn't mean you need one, right? There's a lot of beige and white backgrounds, and I'm actually reluctant to say anything about what is right and wrong because actually a lot of people are stuck with what they have, right? And possibly aren't going to, hoping to get out of this situation as soon as they can. Personally, I like the nice backgrounds.
Yeah, I think it gives personality, right? You get to see a glimpse of somebody's life in a way that can be interesting. Where we've gone away from what's in the background is when we have multiple people presenting and when there's a decent amount of stuff going on the slides, just so the backgrounds don't become distracting. So when we did a workshop a couple of weeks ago where the whole team was there or, was in various parts around the country, but where we all had a nondescript background just so that people would either be focusing on us or on the content. Or in the live events, we'll do that a lot because it's usually me paired with the slide. And I don't want that to be distracting.
I was on a Salesforce event a couple of weeks ago, and there was one guy presenting, and he was obviously standing really close to his desk, and right behind him, he had literally right behind him, he had like a banner which covered the entire camera with Salesforce on it, and it looked really odd because there was no distance behind him. It was like he was right up against it. And it obviously wasn't a wall, so he wasn't in an office, and. I'm always going to assume positive reasons. Maybe he's just in an environment where whatever is behind that wall is just not.
Who knows what was behind.
Yeah.
By the way, there's one of the things that we've used that's actually quite slick is there these massive rolls of paper. They're used for on-scene like model shooting and I think like that, but where you just need a couple of stands and then it's like a massive roll of butcher paper unroll behind you that can be an easy and relatively inexpensive solution for someone who does have something going on in their background that they want to
watch. Absolutely. That one just looked odd because he was so close to it. It seemed like he was really narrowly constrained. But I'm interested in what other people think about detailed or not backgrounds because I think that's very personal as well.
Yeah, for sure. What about tech platform of choice when it comes to presenting virtually?
Well, they all have their quirks and strengths and weaknesses. Zoom has kind of been the one which seems to have the great balance of features, ease of use.
Yeah, we've been using Zoom for everything that we're doing and been, for the most part, really happy with it. What do you do to get camera ready? Any quirky habits or rituals?
I do jump around. I've been extremely lucky in my job at Tableau to be able to present on keynote stages. And I host IronViz, right? I get to go on stage in front of 5,000 to 10,000 people and put on a show. And the thing you learn from that, we've had a lot of investment in speaker coaching and that kind of training, and just their attitude to just bringing the energy up before you start something. Now, do I do that before every time I go on a remote presentation in my day job? No, I don't. But
what sort of things would you be advised to do, or have you been coached to do in a scenario like that?
Stretching, standing, adopt the power pose. They're things that kind of feel strange, but do some stretching, shout a bit. Hug everybody.
Power pose, by the way, for those who may not be familiar, there's different ones, but it's like hands over the head or like Superman sort of like, it does something with blood flow. And
I actually did that at the start of the presentation. I was in an all-day team meeting and I was like third on. So it was 11:30 in the morning and we'd had 2.5 hours of presentation. And I was like, okay, everybody stand up, everybody stretch, everybody turn around, look behind you. And people are like, oh, that was really good. Thanks for that. The other thing I have, which I can't show you and people on the podcast can't see anyway, but I actually have a remote control light bulb outside my home office because the kids were just walking in at inopportune moments. So right now, there is a flashing LED light bulb outside my home office. So that's the other thing I do when I get ready is go, Daddy's on air. Do not interrupt.
And do they respect it?
Yes, they have actually. They have. It has been good. They enjoy the concept, and it's a very visual clue. It's like, oh, yeah, Daddy's on air.
I love it. I'm going to need to do that, I think, for myself. Andy, was there anything that you wanted to talk about related to presenting virtually that we haven't covered? We've been sort of all over the place.
Yeah, I just, if people are thinking about how they can improve their own presentations or diving in or having a go, just practice, right? I think people are more forgiving in this situation, and there's loads of places you can go and present in informal, safe environments, right? To your team. I suppose some people might find that highly intimidating, but user groups, whether it's Tableau user groups or storytelling with data user groups, or just those community events like that, you can dive in. So just practice. Find the person who can give you the honest feedback, because it's really important to get honest feedback about your presentation skills. And don't be afraid to experiment. If you've been doing a lot of presentations over the years, throw yourself out of the comfort zone, like you did, Cole. You didn't, like, you have been reluctant to get into virtual training, and it's like, well, we got that function was forced, right?
Survival's dependent on it.
Yeah.
open to things. But yeah, in ways you can learn something new.
But it's just different things you've always, if you've ever thought, I wonder if I present this data or do this presentation or this slide section this way. Well, just try it, right? Try it. Might not work, but you'll never know unless you have a go.
Yes. I love it. Okay, so this has been a really fun conversation, and those are awesome closing tips. And you've given us so many tips throughout the conversation today, right? But that's a great way to sum things up, I think. Practice, get feedback, experiment, right? And learn from the successes, learn from the failures, like in everything that we do. So Andy, I want to say thank you very much for joining me here today. You mentioned a number of resources. We'll make sure we get all of those into the show notes. To those listening, if you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend. And with that, be sure to follow @StoryWithData on Twitter and Instagram. Also, check out all of the great resources at storytellingwithdata.com. Andy, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Cole. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening.